Break the ice.
Now
All
we're
right, I
live.
think we're live. Wonderful. Hello, everybody. And I want you all to appreciate that we've just spent the same 6 minutes wandering around the hotel trying to find the right room that we do at any live conference. So this really replicates the live event very, very well.
It does.
I'm Louis Eisen, and I'm moderating this very small panel. Unfortunately, one of our panelists, Jim Middlefield's not able to make it today due to a family issue, but we have Jeffrey Wolf to pick up the bulk of do the heavy lifting for both sides.
Yep.
So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about myself in a minute, but I'm going to ask Jeff to start off, introduce himself, and just address the subject directly. How do people build their IG knowledge? What do they need to do?
Sure. Thank you. Good morning, Louis. Good morning, audience. Jeffrey Wolf. I'm the Director of Corporate Solutions at iPro. Thrilled to be with you this morning. And my background is, although I've worked for the last decade now in legal operations and e-discovery, my background is in information content management, information technology. So, I think that the key here in building your IG knowledge as we jump into what I think will be more of a roundtable discussion than a panel, given the size of our group today, is about assembling the right team of people. I think that's kind of apt for our session, but it's not necessarily having all the knowledge yourself, but knowing where to go to within your organization or within your peer community to find the information.
Good. Jeffrey, just before you go on, I want to draw people's attention to the comments panel on the right of the screen so that if you want to throw stuff up, throw it in. Everybody should be able to see it. And we should also be able to be in a position to respond. So sorry for that interruption, but yeah, pick up.
No interruption
So
at all.
what do people need to do? What should they be looking at? If someone says, I'm stuck, I see all these possibilities out there, I don't know where to turn. What do I do?
Well, I think you start internally first, right? So you make an inventory of the skill sets around you. And there's so many different subdisciplines into information governance that you're bound to have a skill set within your organization already in whether it's records management, document management, knowledge management, retention, destruction. I think you have to know what you have and where you're lacking to begin the process, right? So then it's looking outside of the organization, perhaps in the peer community. Groups, like this, like others that in the area that where you can draw from that knowledge. I think ultimately it comes down to not trying to do everything yourself, but building a consensus within the group.
Okay, fair enough. All right, but let me take the other angle now. Let's say
Yeah.
there's somebody who said, I want to do everything. I want to learn all those different areas.
Mm-hmm.
Am I spreading myself too thin?
Possibly, but it depends again on what you're trying to accomplish. There are a ton of resources out there. I think that's the first thing we can talk about is the community that exists. There are, it's a bit of a challenge. I found as I've tried to learn more of the information governance side of things. As I said, my focus is typically around how it impacts legal operations within corporations. But as I've tried to expand my own knowledge of information governance and kind of move left when we talk about e-discovery, we talk about information governance being to the left of the rest of the process. As I've learned more about moving left in that process, I've discovered there are different schools of thought out there. There's not, for example, one reference model in information governance. You have multiple reference models out there. So I think the first step in the process is figuring out which discipline, which model you're going to try to adopt to find the right resources. I think that's the jumping off point is where does your organization exist today? I've spoken with corporations kind of all over the spectrum of the Fortune 1000, Fortune 2000 that occupy different areas in an information governance maturity. Right. So there are ones that have very robust policies in place for content management, content retention, destruction, information tagging and classification. And then there are corporations that are high up in the the spectrum of being large corporations, but do not have established policies in place,
Okay.
and struggle to find a consensus amongst themselves. One of those areas, and I think we can delve into a little bit more as we get into the discussion, is how the different departments of an organization can come to an agreement on information governance. Often, for example, IT wants legal to make decisions and legal wants IT to make decisions, for example. So just deciding who is going to be keeper of the policies is a challenge.
Right. So actually, you were just reaching into an area that I was just going to ask you about, and that is because you've got experience with a wide variety of groups. Who's taking the lead, really? Or is there a lead? Or if you see going forward, is there going to be a lead?
I think it varies. Honestly, I hate the "it depends" answer, but it's true.
It may apply for sure.
It applies, yeah, absolutely. So you have in some organizations, for example, compliance, risk, IG fall into the legal track. They report up into the CLO. In some organizations, it reports up into human resources. In some organizations, it reports up into IT. So I think the structure of the organization somewhat dictates, at least initially, how you would even get started. And that's a bit of a challenge because there's not a cookie cutter approach. There's not a one size fits all.
And we don't really have a sort of an optimum setup that we would recommend to people. If somebody asked, if we got to position ourselves, where should we choose? Do we have a sort of sense of where IG is best to reach up to? I mean, I know that for a long time, information management struggled heading up to IT because basically they were dealing with an 800-pound elephant. And, they couldn't really have as much autonomy in many cases as they would like. In some cases, IM goes up into its own stream. But do we have a sense of where's a good place for it? Where would we like it to be?
I don't necessarily have the best answer for that, to be honest with you, because I've seen it work really well under both legal and I've seen it work really well under IT. I think it just depends on the delineation from the executive management on where to best fit that, because I've seen some really odd organizations where, for example, HR reports into legal. Mm-hmm. And so, if everything risk related falls into the legal operations sphere, then yes, that would be the right place to have a information governance policy manager, chief compliance officer, all in that structure. But I just don't think there's one formula that really works for all organizations.
Okay, fair enough. I'm going to ask you another question in a moment, but I'm wondering if I can ask the people who are watching this, if you wouldn't mind just entering in the chat, the comments where you're calling in from, partly because we need to make sure that comments thing is working, because I haven't seen anything come up
there yet.
Yeah, but just to make sure, if we don't see anybody there, I know there are people listening, but if we don't see anyone there, we'll assume it's the comments feature that's not working. So just enter where you're from, and then we get to work on you. Yeah.
I'd love to know who else is in the room, and kind of what organizations they represent. That would be great. People, we're seeing chat. We're not seeing Lewis. We're not seeing the comments in the live stream here, but I am seeing them in the chat in the yellow room.
Okay. So, let me see if I can do that, because I am missing those.
I've got both screens up just to see it. Yeah.
Okay. Would you? Well, I'm looking for that. You want to address any of those comments?
Well, right now they're people are just noting where they're coming, what geographic location. I would love to hear. Corporations, like where are you? What organizations are you with? Governmental agencies. And I would love to get some questions from the audience, because that would be super helpful. I know our panel was supposed to be larger today. It was Todd. I see Todd's from Silver Spring. I'm actually in the DC area as well.
Yep, and I'm calling in from Ottawa, and I see Trevor's there. So yeah, thanks everyone. So we've got a good group of people that are looking at this. Um, one of the things that the angle I think we should be looking at, part of expanding your information governance knowledge, is to look at the fields: privacy, freedom of information, legal, etc. But the other is looking at some of the soft skills that we need in order to work together. Do you have any sense there of where people should be looking to expand their soft skills?
Well, I think that goes back to, some of the things that have long been around, like Six Sigma, project management skills, organizational skills, PMP. Those I think those established disciplines and curricula for knowledge and certification exist in other areas that can be very much utilized in information governance, right? So those skill sets are valuable, even though the terms have changed in many respects. What about you? Do you have suggestions in the area? I'm curious.
I would like to see, just generally, so my interest in all of this is always, how do we move the agenda forward, whatever that agenda piece is. And so in the IG space, and that's why I work with policies. So part of what I think I would like to see people generally learn is how to de-escalate, problem resolution,
conflict
management. Yeah, how to deal with areas of groups that are resistant, and we know we have people that are resistant, and we tend to come at them with a hammer. And if we really want, and sometimes we make friends with legal or somebody up top so we can come at them with a hammer. But I'm not sure that that's always the right approach.
You attract more flies with honey than vinegar.
Basically.
Yeah. That's an interesting question. Interpersonnel skills, I think, comes into play here, right? When you're trying to gain a consensus within an organization. I think it's part people skill, part project management. So that's a good point. I don't often address I'm a technologist by nature, so I don't often look to the interpersonal element that IG brings to the table, that kind of ability to build a consensus.
The other thing that I think, Jeff, is that I've always found was an issue was that we are very fractured, I think, siloed.
Yes.
And even for a long time, I know when the actual we have, even today, even before you get into information governance and its huge spread, we have partners, colleagues in archives, in library, information science, all kinds of stuff that we do not work very well together with. And now we're expanding this even wider. And I think there's some, I don't know if it's a certain degree of protectionism or just hesitance on how do I work with these other groups without giving up my autonomy. I don't know, but I can see that breaking these silos is an issue.
It is. It's challenging. I'll give you an example there. I work, obviously, I work for a software manufacturer, right? So, and we, iPro as a software manufacturer, we work across a spectrum within organizations that touches various departments. So, for example, although I tend to focus more on legal ops, we do a fair amount of work in the governance space. And just getting consensus within an organization, whenever you're touching the data, requires a group, requires the buy-in of a lot of different departments. So obviously legal, but definitely IT, information security, sometimes risk and compliance. And that can be a challenge. Just in the legal aspect, we have, I know there's some of our attendees indicated that they work with law firms, and I'll touch on that in a second because I have got more stories there. But just between, for example, in-house legal and IT, there is often a disconnect. And the collaboration between those two departments is super important, especially as it relates to legal performing their job, which is often internal investigations, complying, with potential litigation, working with their own outside counsel. So we work very hard as a partner to organizations to try to bring these departments together, to get them to operate under a standard. That standard really is an information governance policy, because in order to understand what you have data-wise within an organization, you have to have some policy around how that data is managed, right?
There's a lot of places that fits really well, Jeff. Trevor online here has raised an area that I know a lot of people are coming into conflict with, and that's data.
Yeah.
And there are times where we're thinking, we want to merge these two, but how do we reconcile? When I talked about conflict de-escalation, I mean, that's
data's the exact opposite.
Yeah. So how do we reconcile? How do we approach that? What do you recommend for people?
Oh, geez, how long do we have, Lewis? So I gave a webinar yesterday. I just did a webinar yesterday on loving what you do. And one of the topics that came up was the challenges of data. IDC Globescape predicts that our global data creation by 2025, so 2 years from now, will reach 181 zettabytes. So a zettabyte, right? So we operate today in primarily gigabytes and terabytes, sometimes in petabytes. After petabyte comes exabyte. After exabyte comes zettabyte.
Yeah.
So an insane amount of data. The rate at which we create data explodes every day. And we're always coming up with new types of data, which is the bigger challenge. So it's not just the explosion of the amount of data we have now, it's the creation of new types of data. If you go back 10 years ago, nobody was really doing real-time communication at the level we are now on platforms like Teams or Slack. But a lot of work product now happens on those collaboration platforms. So in terms of how you get a hold of that is, first of all, understanding what your organization is creating and where all of that data resides. Because I think before you can do anything with it, you have to have an understanding of that. But beyond that is really assessing the risk associated with each of those data types and making a decision about how long we should really be keeping them, both live and archive and backup, and destroying accordingly. I was at a conference recently where we were talking about retention and destruction policies, and the speaker said, I won't identify any names, but the speaker was talking about the fact that his organization has fantastic IG policies around how they organize and manage their data. The problem was that the attorneys weren't actually following those policies very often. So the best, I think that's a talking point here, is the best policy in the world is only as good as the people who are going to actually follow it.
So I have to tell you, though, I've done some investigation with the Government of Canada because they have a data governance community that they building up. And when I spoke to them, asked who's included, what does data mean to you? Right. I got an answer that blew me away that nobody would have heard. The answer was, data is anything that people make a decision about. Oh my God, you mean you don't look at the world between structured and unstructured? We don't look at the bits and bytes? And I think we are so used to information management going, oh, well, that's unstructured, that's ours. Oh, databases, oh, that's theirs. Whereas when you look at freedom of information and privacy, they don't care about that distinction.
No, they don't. You're right.
And electronic discovery and...
Well, I focused in a world of primarily unstructured data, right? But you're absolutely correct. Paper is data. Right? Any decision that is made, whether it's written down or typed in digital form, is data. Data goes far beyond that. I was talking with an attorney who was telling me about a case she was involved in that involved smart cement. The cement had sensors in it that was returning information, data, that was germane to a case. And how they manage that data becomes important. So we could obviously evolve this into a conversation about management of IoT, but I think that's a very separate topic.
Mm-hmm.
But it is not. But it is something that organizations must focus on. Is
Mm-hmm.
how do they get a handle around their data, and how do they address it, and how do they define it? Actually, you brought up an interesting point, right? With or the organization you were talking about brought up an interesting point about data. Data is any decision. Well, what is corporate data? What is law firm data? What is governmental data? Does that extend
data?
What is my client data that I'm in possession of, right?
Absolutely.
What about my employees' mobile devices,
Mm-hmm.
whether they're organizational owned or personal owned?
Yeah.
If my employees are using their personal devices to conduct work, what happens then?
So what I'm seeing is that some of the traditional maybe life cycle stages that have always been the milestones, flag planting posts for IM that don't necessarily apply to data have become a block, whereas they shouldn't be, because 90% of what has to be done around information, all the other areas you're dealing with, people don't care about the format. And
No.
There's no reason why. I mean, there are organizations that have a single policy governing both unstructured and structured data with separate rules when it comes to maybe retention around them or classification around them. But it's still one general overall policy, and that's
as it should be.
As it should be. Yeah. And I think
who owns that policy, right? That's the difficult thing that I know a lot of the people I've consulted with struggle with is who owns that policy. And I would actually love to hear in comments that thank you for the attendees that are participating in the comments chat panel.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to see who in your organization owns information governance policies. I think that would be a great thing to jump off on as a discussion.
They end up being the lead, do they?
Yes.
Yeah. So I have to make a caution, though, and with respect to policy ownership. As from my perspective, ownership is more about lead than about building, say, boundaries, building borders. Okay. One of the areas that I saw when I was at one of the departments I had, there was a very large enterprise-wide policy to govern assets at the organization. Facilities had it, security had it, corporate had it, everybody had it. And they all talked about preserving, maintaining, and disposing and protecting the assets of the organization. And over here, the information management group wanted their own policy about preserving and saving and managing and disposing. He said, all you guys have to do is get them over there to amend the definition of asset to include information asset, not the physical asset. And they refused. And the reason they did, they said, why should those people make rules about our topic?
Right.
And
that goes exactly back to the point I made earlier, which is the best policies in the world are only as good as the people that actually enact them and follow them, right? And that's a challenge. I don't, you know, that's why I think we start at the top of the conversation talking about consensus building, and that's why consensus building is important, because everyone has to buy into an information governance a policy and approach.
So one of the things I'm seeing as some people are mentioning here, policies are owned by everybody in an organization. I think it's good if an organization can take that view. I have a very practical caution when that happens. And again, this is the policy side coming out. There still needs to be in an organization a distinction between doing the work and overseeing doing the work. And every once in a while, when we get to these large, massive policies, they contain an amount of technical detail, which is weeds, not appropriate to the policy level at the top. And by saying, if we're going to have everybody own the policies, which I think is a great idea, we at the same time have to make sure that we are allocating technical specialties standards and procedures down to the right subject level.
Yes.
Right. Otherwise, we get people at the top who are deciding, how many characters need to be in a password, which is not.
It's not really information governance at the end of the day, right? That's information security.
Yeah.
But
it's a technical issue of information security, right? Absolutely. It needs a technical rationale. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that's definitely a gatepost for why policies have to be not top down but bottom up, right?
To a large degree, I agree. Actually, yeah. I've got one other thing I think policy should be. That's my horse that I've been on for the last year that I push a lot. We have been trained in information management that there are certain information management principles like protection, retention, ownership, authorship, and that somehow these principles are immutable and business should understand them. Compliance is an example, transparency.
Right.
But those are not business principles. Those are not business values. I mean, they are for some businesses, as you know, and some businesses really care about transparency. But if you sell skis, transparency is not on top of your list. It's not a business value. Everything that we do in information management does support the business value, but we need to make that connection. So if in fact the ability to have accurate records is to be able to give accurate information to the public,
yes.
And that's because we need the public to trust us. We need to make that connection, a basic business value. The public has to trust us. And
yes.
We're contributing to that in many of the things we're doing. I think we need to make that connection overt.
Well, that brings us all into the privacy realm, right? Because, which I will say at least for North America, is somewhat new ground,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right? The European Union, obviously, data privacy is far more advanced than it is in North America, and their rules have real consequences. But unless we're talking about California, most of the United States and Canada, for that matter, the data privacy hasn't really caught up yet.
No, not at all.
As a discipline of information governance, and I do believe that data privacy is absolutely a discipline of information governance, that is the one lagging behind in most organizations.
What about ethics?
Well, that's a whole different ball of wax. If you talk to law firms, ethics is important. Ethics is a part of the education of the attorneys and their continuing education. But if you talk within governmental agencies or corporations, I don't know that there's anyone addressing ethics.
In many cases, not. What strikes me interesting about ethics is that the point of ethics is to push the legal boundaries.
Yes.
So when we didn't have privacy laws, you might have people making ethical objections to collecting certain information or to using information. We ethically should not be doing this, even though the law allows it. That's the ethics part. Now the law came in and said, okay, now you have privacy protection, and people go, oh, well, fine, I'll just follow the law. But that's not the role of ethics. The role of ethics is to say, beyond the law, beyond what is required, is there something that we're doing that maybe we should?
Exactly.
Right.
Is there another level there that I should be following that is not mandated by government documents?
Exactly.
You're absolutely correct. And to your point, like if the law doesn't have too much of a penalty to it, and this is another ethical area, right? Data privacy actually is a good example there. For some organizations, they may not care about addressing data privacy concerns because the potential ramifications are not significant to the organization or not significant enough to make a change.
The potential legal implications.
Correct. Right.
But there may be ethical implications.
There are definitely ethical considerations, right? So that was the whole. If you go back and look at the EU, and I know that one very well. Every member state had data privacy laws, but if you violated those data privacy laws, there was very little consequence. There was no teeth to the policy, to the law. And that's why GDPR came into place. And GDPR brings with it as much as a 4% penalty on an organization's bottom line for violations of data privacy. So there's actual teeth associated to that law. Do you have to get to the point of having significant ramifications of a law in order to get organizations to adopt measures around them?
You may, but whatever that is, even if they do, we're pushing the ethical boundaries further.
Yes.
Right? I guess one of the concerns I have, when I was in law school, we studied all these different subjects, real estate and family and wills, and every time you had a subject, you had ethics in that subject.
Correct.
So there wasn't a day that you didn't have some ethical issue that you had to deal with on top of the legal question. And yet I think a lot of IM people think, oh, well, there's an ethics group over there and they do that.
Entirely separate. Yeah. When there isn't.
Right.
No. You're right. There is an ethical element to that. And what is the intent? What does the law say? And then what is the ethics behind that? Right? What should we really be doing? The law says we have to do X, but we should probably do X plus Y. Ethically.
There's a really good comments coming through. I mean, people are giving us different ways that they approach this. And I mean, I think you see there isn't one particular way. Any idea, Jeff, say, how do we test that it's working, that we're doing the right thing? I mean, it can't just be that the boss is happy. How do we know that, in fact, what we're doing is working? And I throw this out actually because a lot of, usually when I get policies and people tell me they're not happy with level of compliance with their policies, therefore their policies aren't working.
Right.
And my first question is, well, what's the level of compliance with the speeding laws in your area?
Right.
So there's lots of places where we don't have compliance, but that doesn't mean we don't believe.
Correct.
Right. So how do we know, though?
And that's a really good analogy, right? Because speeding, now we're not talking about information governance, but there's an analogy here I'm getting at. Speeding is in place because studies show that reducing speed saves lives. So the same could be held true of information governance. You might not have full compliance in your IG policies, but they're there to avoid organizational risk.
Exactly.
There's two elements. There's two schools of thought there, right? So if you don't agree with your company's IG policies, then you either join the steering committee to help change them, or you adhere to them. I mean, I think that's what it comes down to, right? A policy is no more than should be a living document, right? Certainly not written in stone tablets displayed in the lobby of your organization. It is a living, breathing policy that needs to adapt over time to a changing world. Someone in the comments posted that structured versus unstructured data is simply an extension of the old paper documents versus electronically stored information, which I completely agree with. It is.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But even the term electronically stored information is now splintered, if you think about it, right? Because we have structured, unstructured, we have ephemeral data now too. What do you do with ephemeral data? Data that disappears after a period of time.
Us talking right now.
Right. If we're recorded, which it is.
It's great. It's no longer ephemeral. That's right.
Right. It's not ephemeral because it's recorded. But I know plenty of attorneys are like, don't send me an email, call me.
Yeah.
Because they don't want a written record, right? But there's a conversation that happened. So that goes back to your ethics question, I think, in many respects.
Priscilla has noted here, too much procedure in a policy muddles the water. I would have said any procedure in a policy muddies the water.
Yes.
And procedure does not belong in policy. And procedure belongs in procedure. And part of that, part of that separation is, again, the separation of the people at the top making broad level strategic decisions and the subject matter experts who are setting procedures to implement those broad level decisions and directions.
Yep.
So
one of the comments I just noticed in chat was that one of the attendees said, I own the policies.
Yes.
I'm an IG team of one. but so does the general manager, the CEO of that organization. Well, multiple people can't own the policy. So I'm curious to know how that works, and that in and of itself is a challenge. Who truly owns that policy?
Yeah, it should have one owner. I would have thought.
Yes.
All right, we're hitting the sort of end of our time. Any parting words for people, do you think?
No, yes, I would say that that peer communities are fantastic ways to learn more about what you're looking for here. So, as we started on this topic, and I think we should finish on this topic, which is the best way to build IG knowledge is to look to peer groups like these.
And what I'm also hearing from you, if I understand what my takeaway point from a lot of what you said, is that there is no one single ideal model, right? This varies by organization, and different organizations will have different strengths, and what might work in one organization where legal has might in fact another organization might be somebody else, but we need to be able to work quite right. Good. Then I understood what you said. Perfect. Thank you very much, Jeff. It was very helpful. Thank you, everybody, for your participation.
Yeah, appreciate all the attendees. Absolutely. Thank you, Louis. This has been great.
Enjoy the rest of the conference.